Hello and welcome to an overview of the Enforcive solution for your exit point security challenges. My name is Martin Norman, and in this video I will be introducing you to the basic functions of our application access processing. Enforcive produces many tools for security, whether you need compliance, enhanced access control, event auditing, or any of the other items displayed on this slide. Exit point security is just one element of our access control solutions, and it is enabled through three modules: Application Access Control, Application Audit, and Application Analyzer. The purpose of these modules is to allow you to intercept external connections, track what is occurring, and allow you to define permissions over and above your OS authorities. We will see later how those permissions can be defined at multiple levels. I often find that this area of security is misunderstood, so let's start with some simple explanations of why it is important and how it works. Let's imagine that this is a green screen program that allows an administrator to make some changes to one of the payroll files. The user is only allowed to make changes to certain fields in that file, so only the shipping department, which is highlighted and underlined, is available for change, and some of the records aren't displayed. That's because this person is only allowed to maintain the part-time personnel. But in order to make changes to the department, they have to have update rights on this file. However, because they have full update rights on that file, they could, in theory, open up that same file through an ODBC tool such as Excel and see all the records, not just the part-timers, and they could change the department for all of those, the salary for all of those, and even make changes that were invalid. So it seems to make sense to me that you need to treat those two different types of accesses in different ways. With the first one, the user was being controlled by the program, stopping them from doing things that they shouldn't do. However, the same access using the same profile to the same file but using a tool like Excel could have a major impact on the contents of that file. So how do we help with this challenge? We actually utilize some IBM functionality called exit point processing. The way it works is when you connect through as a user, whether you're using Telnet, FTP, or an ODBC connection, the system automatically looks into the registration information to find out if there is an exit program that's registered. So we register that program of ours to the registration information, and when it comes through, not only can we then track the events as they go through the system, but if you want us to, we can also define permissions and help you decide whether the request should be allowed or whether it should be rejected. So that's the theory behind exit point processing. Let's see how it works in practice. I'm going to do that using an example of a library which has 4 files in it, and one of my profiles has been authorized at the operating system level to 3 of those files: the salary file, the department file, and the employee file. Just to prove the point, here I've signed on to the green screen. I've made a display physical file member command to my 3 files that I'm authorized to, and then the fourth file in that library that I was working with, I'm actually currently not authorized to, but the first 3, yes, I'm authorized to those. I'm now going to use the Enforcive Enterprise Security Manager to look at the transactions, to analyze them, and also maybe to put some permission controls on there as well. On the tree structure in front of you, I've highlighted in red the 3 modules that relate to this exit point security processing. The first of those is the application access control. Here on the left hand side you choose the user or the group of users that you're working with, and on the right hand side you define the permissions you want to give to that user or group of users. Application audit is just what it says. It's an audit trail of those transactions going through the exit points and the information that we've collected about them. Very important to note here, this information is not normally available through the operating system. You need software like this in order to see these events. The third element is the application analyzer, and here we can see both a graphical and also a numerical statistical representation of the volume of transactions going through the various exit points. So let's start with the application access control. Here we can see on the screen the box in red in the top left is showing the level that we're defining these permissions. As you can see, you can choose an individual user ID, its group profile, a generic naming convention, a user group, we'll come back to that later, the IP address range, or drop down to what we call our system policy. Over on the right hand side in green, this is where we would define the permissions for that user or that group or that IP address range. In passing, just note that the top above the green box shows some red writing which tells us that for this user they do not have their own individual permissions. They will get their permissions from somewhere else in the level tree. And for my example here, I've built my permissions at what we call the user group level. This is a virtual grouping within the Enforcive software that allows you to allocate a number of users to a grouping, and that can be a department, it could be a region, it could be a job function, however you like to use that. So I've created a group called HR user, and as you can see, I've allocated two profiles, user 1 and user 2, to that group. So now I'm going to look at the permissions for that group. I'm not going to define the permissions at the user level, I'll do it at the group level. So we can see there on the screen, I've highlighted the HR user grouping. I've specified in the red box at the top that I'm now using our recommended method, which is defining permissions at the user group level. And over on the right hand side, I can now define the permissions that I want to give to any of the users who are within that user group. I could stop at that point and say that all of the people within that HR user group is permitted to do any type of I could stop at that point and just define that anybody within the HR user grouping can perform an ODBC connection through the database server or an FTP server or an FTP client. But I'm going to choose here to be even more granular on the definitions of the permissions I will give to this group. So by clicking on the continuation button that I've circled in red on the right hand side, I'm taken to this screen where I can define the functions of an ODBC connection of a database server that I'm allowing this group of users to perform. So I can perform reads, I can perform deletes, I can perform updates, but I'm not permitted to create a source file, delete a file, add a file member. If I wish, I can go down to another level of granularity. Here I've clicked on another continuation button highlighted in red next to the read function, and I've now chosen that I want to maintain permission to say that only objects in the HR prod library will be authorized for this group of users to perform an ODBC read. However, I don't have to stop there. If I don't want to, I can actually go down to an object level. So I've clicked on the object list icon highlighted in red, taking me down to the list of all the objects that I'm currently authorized to in the library. As you can see there, I've specified that the department file I'm allowed to do a read of, the bank file, the employee file, and the salary file I'm not. So I've chosen to go to a very detailed level of granularity right down to the object name. You don't have to do that. You could stop at the function level, you could even stop at the application level, but I've chosen to go down to the object level. So let's see the result of defining the permissions in that way. Here I'm logging into Excel with a data connection that I previously built. I'm signing on with the HR user 1 profile. I choose the file that I'm interested in opening within Excel, and if you recall, the department file was the one file that I'm authorized to access. And I continue through a few screens, and eventually the contents of that department file will be displayed for me. If I now return and try and perform exactly the same thing on the employee file in that HR prod library, we'll see that it is treated differently, and a rejection message will appear as part of the query building from within Excel. Returning back to the application audit within the Enforcive Enterprise Security software, we can see transactions representing the different types of read and retrieve and log on that were performed through the database server. And over on the right hand side, I've highlighted in red the two select statements. The first of those, the department one, which was allowed, and then at the top of the screen the employee file where it was rejected. And over on the left hand side we see an R icon representing that rejected transaction. I can then drill down into that by double clicking, and I can see more details of the access and why it was rejected. So I can see the username, I can see an IP address, I can see the statement that was being performed. And then in red I've highlighted a very important fact. It's saying that the class of permissions that we found that prevented this user from performing this read is at the user group level. So if I want to find out and maybe make a change and add that permission on to that group, I have to go to the user group level and make a change to permit someone to access that employee file. But I may look at this and think, well, I've obviously defined the system wrong, because the HR user 1, they do need to access this file, so really maybe they shouldn't be part of that user grouping called HR user. Maybe the best thing is to build their own personal permission so they can get to that file. So that's what I've done here. I've selected the user 1 profile at the user level. I've gone in to look at the database permissions. I've said that they can perform those database ODBC connections, and they can perform a read, and they can perform a read of anything in the HR prod library. And now I've specified that there are actually 2 files within that library that this profile can access through ODBC. If I then go straight back to Excel, perform that access of the employee file again, this time I'm permitted and I'm allowed through to see the contents of the file within Excel. I can now use the application analyzer to investigate what's happening on the system. Here's the analyzer looking at what we call our SWR, our success, our warning and our rejects. And I've highlighted the reject transactions on the screen, and I'm going to click on the icon that's been highlighted in red at the top of the screen, where I can drill in and see all of the individual audit transactions. A pop-up window will appear showing me the application audit records that relate to the search that I did within the application analyzer. So I'm seeing just the rejected transactions. So I can see my rejections and also other rejected transactions that have occurred in recent days. Because of the time available to me, I've only shown one very simplistic example of exit point security, focusing on ODBC connections. As I mentioned before, there are many more functions available. Now here we can see some of them on the screen. One thing I mentioned in passing is permissions by IP address range. This allows you to build a set of IP address ranges and specify for those connections coming in from the outside, when someone comes in from that range, what they are allowed to perform. And if you wish, you can also attach only certain accounts to certain IP address ranges. We have some special optimization processing for service accounts and other types of user profiles on the system. Maybe those service accounts are used for maybe a client access. Maybe those service accounts are used for something like a client server configuration, and all of your connections come under the same service account. We can turn on optimization for that to make the processing more efficient and to reduce the amount of transactions that we see. We can actually do selective monitoring in a number of ways. You could choose, for example, only to record rejections and warning events. As we now have all of this great information being collected from the exit point connectivity, we can then schedule reports so you can see the people coming in, the rejections that have occurred, and you can report upon those either ad hoc or through a scheduler. Similarly, if there are very critical rejections that occur, we can help you with email and pop-up alerts for those most important rejections. Another very popular feature is day and time restriction. So if a user doesn't need to FTP or Telnet or ODBC outside of normal business hours, then prevent that from occurring. The third from last additional functionality there describes what we call our swap processing. If you need to give a profile more or even less authority when they are performing their FTP or ODBC, etc., you can define that too. In terms of replication, we're very used to handling multiple partitions and multiple servers, and we provide tools for you to help copy your settings from one system to another. With the final item on this screen, I'm just going to dwell on this a little bit. We have what we call our simulation mode. I mentioned a few times warning events as well as rejection and successful events. You can choose to run one of the exit points in a warning mode, in a simulation mode, for a short while, so you can watch the transactions going through and see what would have been rejected if you'd had it running in full reject mode. This is a very helpful tool for when you're building your configuration and making sure you don't prevent anyone from accessing that you really did want to allow them to get through to the external connection. Hopefully this short video has been a useful introduction to the Enforcive Exit Point security solution. For further information, please contact your local Enforcive partner or visit www.enforcive.com.